Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon, and today we are going to be exploring the expanded format. This is something I haven't done for about a year, but now in the 2018 season there are finally expanded events happening once again in and around Europe, so I thought it's probably a good time to look into this metagame. There's plenty of things that have happened since the last batch of expanded tournaments, even in the US. We have 2 new sets, and we also have a ban list as well, which changes a few things. So, plenty to discuss, and I know that Fort Wayne is on the minds of many people, the upcoming regional championship, so hopefully this is a well-timed video. So, let's get into it. First of all, a quick little rundown of what I'm going to try and do today. First of all, we'll have a look at the established archetypes in Expanded. These are things that have been around pretty much all of last season and stuff like that, and then we'll look at the ban list and how that impacts some of these archetypes. Then we'll look at new inclusions from Guardians Rising and Burning Shadows, not only the new inclusions that go into old decks, but also some new archetypes as well. So as you can see, points 4 and 5, we'll be looking at how things change, as well as looking at some brand new threats that enter the expanded format, which is very interesting. I'll do a quick overview of what I believe will be the new metagame that you have to sort of think about. I'll have a look at a few top techs and also a tier list right at the end. A lot of this is theory. I've only tested a few archetypes so far in Expanded, so I can see this tier list changing. I can see different decks popping up here and there. I haven't been able to test every single one of these decks. I think there's like 25 or so archetypes. So a lot of it's theory, but hopefully it is sound theory and we can at least start the discussion for a lot of these decks. So let's get straight into it. First of all, let's look at the established archetypes. We have, in no particular order really, just lots of different things out there in Expanded, as you can see. I think some of the big ones are Trevenant. Yveltal Maxis was very, very strong. Turbo Darkrai was in and around there. Seismitoad variants also kind of dropping off a little bit, but mainly that was because of decks like Decidueye Vileplume, Vespiquen Vileplume, and Lurantis Vileplume, all of which, of course, will be going thanks to the Forest of Giant Plants ban, which we'll talk about in a moment. Then we have Night March, never really reached top tiers, but it's expected to be a little bit better, as we'll talk about later on. Archistois, I think since Getsis, that deck's not been too popular. Mega Ray is pretty cool. Raikou Eels has been up there. Vespiquen Flareon additionally. Primal Groudon is a fan favourite for a few people. Aselgor Wobbuffet's an annoying lock deck. Volcanion with Blacksmith is a powerful concept as well, very aggressive. Greninja was able to flirt with fighting in Expanded as well as Standard in a very similar fashion. Zygarde Carbink as well popped up as kind of like an anti-meta style deck. Sableye Garbodor frustrated a few people, and then we have things like Mega Manectric, mainly in there to counter things like Yveltal. Tool Drop and Rainbow Force as well, a couple other non-EX variants. You can pause now if ever you want to. I'm just going to really do a quick rundown because there's so much to talk about in this video. But yeah, basically a whole bunch of archetypes. It is a very diverse metagame with a lot of things potentially viable. So let's have a look at the bans and how this impacts the metagame. So Forest of Giant Plants and Archeops will be joining Lysander's trump card as the 3 banned cards of Expanded. The impact of Forest going is that Decidueye and Vileplume variants are no longer viable. Decidueye only really worked with Vileplume and Expanded, but also there was things like Lurantis Plume that I think it won the regionals, or came very close. I believe it was Azul playing it. And also Vespiquen was in and around top tables thanks to Forest of Giant Plants. Those are all gone. Couple of notes on this. That means that Trevenant is the only turn 1 item locking deck in the expanded format. There's also Seismitoad and there's also Noivern, I guess. But I believe Trev is most likely going to be the more powerful item lock deck that we can expect. And it's just one less item lock to deal with, which is something good, I guess, and healthy for the game. Another couple of points is that really we only have Vespiquen. Aselgor as well can be a grass type attacker. Normally you use Mew EX regardless. And we'll see later on that thanks to things like Ace, Sorola and Guzma, I think Aselgor Wobbuffet gets way worse anyway. So really the only grass type attackers in the new format is going to be Vespiquen and Golisopod GX. So really having grass weakness may not be all that shabby for some archetypes that we talk about later on. So it could pave the way for some like water stuff because there's only really Vespiquen that has to worry about that weakness. And then looking at the Archeops ban, Maxi style decks lose pretty much the one thing that they search for the most. I think a lot of the time it was a split of Archeops and then Gallade, and essentially you would get Gallade out if it's against something like a Darkrai, or basically if it's against any non-evolution based deck. But Archeops shut down a huge portion of decks. A lot of the time, in fairness, it was trying to shut down things like Vileplume decks, but at the same time there's things like Eels, things like Bronzong, things like Greninja, Vespiquen Flareon, all sorts of evolution-style archetypes got shut down as soon as Archeops came into play, and now that sort of paves the way for evolution decks to be much more safe and secure in the meta, which is really a good thing, I think, because otherwise we get all these brand new archetypes, especially with GX as a mechanic, because evolutions are only really good because they're GX Pokemon. If there was Archeops, it basically meant that no new archetypes would make it into the expanded format, so this is a really good ban, I think, very healthy for the game. And in terms of the Maxi engine in general, it may not be worth playing anymore in a bunch of archetypes. Maxi's Yveltal was one of the most popular decks, and Archeops covered a wide range of weaknesses because you simply stop all these evolution-style decks from working in the first place. And especially with Trashalanche Garbodor, maybe having a Maxi-style engine with a bunch of item cards to discard, like 4 Compressor, 4 Ultra Ball, 4 Mail, this could be much more risky and much less of a payoff now that Archeops isn't available. Obviously, there are still some good Maxi targets. Gallade is actually really good in the meta because of Turbo Darkrai, but it may be something that not every deck adopts anymore. It's only really a few things that can get away with playing Maxis, I think, in my opinion at least. I think it's only really Night March that will play a Maxi engine. Maybe a couple others here and there, but overall not too many, because it's just not worth it anymore now that we don't have Archeops. So something to bear in mind for certain, and a much safer place for evolutions in the new expanded format. So after these bans, we can cross out a few archetypes. We can get rid of the Lurantis, the Vespiquen, and the Decidueye variants, and also to an extent you can see Yveltal Maxis at the second spot all the way on the left of the page. I would say that the Maxis style engine goes in Yveltal. I think Yveltal will still be a relevant archetype. I think it will be adapting though, and we'll talk about the adaptations of that deck later on when we look at some new inclusions from the 2 new sets. So bear in mind, Yveltal probably won't play Maxis anymore. I think Night March still will, because it can play things like Marowak and things like the new Machoke to protect itself against Seismitoad and Trevenant respectively. So I think it's only really that deck that will play a Maxi style, and Yveltal won't really anymore unless it really wants to tech hard against Turbo Darkrai, which it could still do in theory. So yeah, I think Yveltal will definitely be adapting after this ban. So let's have a look at the new inclusions. These are 5 big cards that are going to be seen in a lot of different decks. We see these a lot in Standard, and it will be the case again in Expanded. Tapu Lele, incredible card, jumps right into the format. Mewtwo EX was played in a bunch of decks. Now you can just play Lele instead. Splitting your count of Shaymins and Leles as well to have less easy prizes on your bench is going to be important as well for a bunch of different reasons. So Lele, obviously an incredible card, going to be seen in a load of different decks. It's also very good for turn 1 style decks. Things like Trevenant that can get you a Wally. Obviously you used to play like Level Ball for Jirachi, but I personally think Lele is just a better card overall, and for my testing so far I've been trying a compressor engine with heavy rescue stretchers in my Trev, and it goes pretty well. So having Lele plus like compressor for Wally can be really good. Also having Wonder Tag for Getsis or Maxi, also much better than having Jirachi for these things, because, you know, you have double the HP and no weakness, and you're a relevant attacker on the bench. So all these reasons why Lele will be incredible. I don't really have to sell this card to you guys, you all know by now. Field Blower, pretty much a strict upgrade to things like Tool Scrapper or Megaphone. Megaphone obviously better for Tool Drop, but who really cares about Tool Drop too much? I don't think it's a top tier threat at the very least. So Field Blower, a really nice inclusion for most decks because it also contests the Stadium Wall, which could be important against a few things. Rescue Stretcher, really nice Pokemon recovery. Don't sleep on how good this card is, especially because we have Battle Compressor in the format. It could even be a search style card. We know that Decidueye Vileplume played a heavy line of Revitalizer. It played like 3 copies because it also played heavy Battle Compressor, and that could be something that we adopt in a few other archetypes. For example, as I mentioned earlier, Trevenant playing Compressor Stretcher is actually very, very consistent, and it's better than playing things like Level Ball, because Rescue Stretcher can also get you your breaks or your Trevs, whilst you're also fitting the deck of other deadweight via Compressor. It's just a much cleaner engine. So Stretcher is a really, really nice card. It could even be in Night March. I know you play Puzzles, so you probably don't need it, but these are consideration cards because Stretcher is also very, very cool and good. Then Guzma and Acerola. I think in general the package of these 2 cards pretty much kills off the effectiveness of sort of like Paralysis Lock style decks, mainly the Aselgor Wobbuffet variant I'm talking about here. But also it's awkward for things like Seismitoad that likes to just Quaking Punch stall and use lasers to rack up damage. We have used Keldeo in the past. Maybe Keldeo will still be played. But now that we have Guzma, it's just so much better to get out of this and start swinging against the Seismitoad much better. Oftentimes, especially things like Toadtina, they relied on stalling and punching for a large amount of turns. Now Guzma can get you out of these awkward spots. Same thing for Trevenant, really. Acerola is good for also these reasons, for defending you against things like Seismitoad, but actually it's incredible in Seismitoad as well. Toad, very, very nice at just picking itself up, reattaching DC, reattaching your tool, punching again. So anything that can't one-hit KO a Seismitoad is going to be in trouble. Just like how we've seen Toadbats be playing Super Scoop-Ups, now you can play Acerolas instead, or in addition to even, and that's going to be crazy good for you for wiping off damage. So Toad has to be worried about these supporters, but also can benefit from these supporters at the same time. So it's going to be interesting to see where that ends up fitting in the format. I personally don't have it top tier, but obviously Seismitoad's Quaking Punch is still a big threat out there, so bear this in mind for sure. So now we're going to get into the nitty gritty, the specifics. I've got 3 different slides of this, I think. I actually haven't changed the top slide of all these, but you'll see that they're all different archetypes. I've just gone for new additions and new threats of all these things. Again, I'm going to try and do a rapid fire because there's like 20 decks and there's lots to get through. We still have a bunch of slides to go, so pause now and take a look, decompress yourselves, but I'll do a really quick run through. Trevenant gains Necrozma GX, which is nutty, nutty good. Being able to spread 100 on all EX and GXs really accelerates the win condition of Trevenant. You only really need to get off a few Silent Fears to win the game if you are up against EX and GX decks. Very good stuff. Couple of threats. Everyone's going to be playing Guzma, and some archetypes will be playing Acerola as well. Wiping off damage or simply gusting the Trev out the way is going to be good for you. And also Guzma is annoying because you can't really stall and Silent Fear anymore as effectively. Maxi's Yveltal, it gains a few cool tricks. If you want to keep with the Maxi engine, you could play Machoke to try and defend yourself against Trevenants. Very similar to just playing a Giratina, but maybe slightly better. You're already a Dark deck, so you probably don't care about Trev too much. You can play your own Darkrai GX. If you are playing lasers in Yveltal, maybe you play the GX just for his GX attack, which is a big one-hit knockout. You can play Drampa GX as well, which is pretty cool. I think this card is also very good and expanded. It has a place here for sure. Being able to get rid of DCEs against things like Seismitoad is going to be really good. You also have the consistency boost with its GX attack and its one-hit KO option. So Drampa GX probably fits into Yveltal. As I said earlier, I don't think you play Maxis anymore. I think you just become like Yveltal Drampa, like a straight build. Maybe playing things like Silent Lab and other disruption tools, maybe lasers as well. So yeah, these are all adaptations for Yveltal. Ultra of the Moon's also potentially really good. I mean, we have Dark Cloak anyway, so I'm not sure how much we want Moon, but you could free up a bench slot and change your stadium that way. Threat for this card is going to be Gardevoir GX. I don't know how super popular this will be, but I personally think Gardy is viable in this format, and it could be an issue for Yveltal. Turbo Darkrai, I think, gains one of the most out of the 2 new sets, Burning Shadows and Guardians Rising. Darkrai GX is nutty for the deck, of course. It gives you more ramp for your Dark Pulse, whilst also being an attacker. If you play either things like Malamar EX or your own lasers, maybe just 1 or 2, you can cash in on that GX attack and take big one-hit knockouts. Ultra of the Moon also pretty good. I've tested a little bit of Turbo Darkrai. I don't play Ultra of the Moon, but it is an option for you. Marshadow GX is an issue for this deck though. Whole deck is weak to Dark. You can tech in other Pokemon if you want to, but it does start making it a little bit clunkier, so Marshadow is potentially a splashable answer to this sort of archetype. And Gallade may be seeing less play because of Maxis being less useful, but Gallade may be showing also in Gardevoir GX, so that's also potentially an issue for you. Dark Dragons, technically you do gain the Darkrai GX and Ultra of the Moon, but you can't really play Ultra because your Dragons have 3 retreat costs, so Ultra of the Moon would still force you to pay retreat, which is bad. And Darkrai GX you probably don't have space on the bench for because you're going to have Dragons on there, so really I don't think it gains anything, and is also weak to those two things I mentioned earlier. Toad Tina does gain Acerola, really nice card for the archetype. And Marshadow GX, I say this just because you can have a Pokemon using Quaking Punch that isn't weak to Grass. So that's potentially pretty cool, and you could have things like Tauros GX in the deck as well to also copy with Marshadow. Pretty cool option there, maybe just a one-of in Toad decks, also improving your Turbo Darkrai matchup because you're going to be doubling down on damage, which is also very good. Couple of threats, maybe Galistopod shows its face as it did in Standard, and Drampa GX I think is the big one for Seismitoad variants. It's just so easy for everyone to get rid of your energy now. If people just splash one Drampa in their lists, they can have a much better time against Toad, and you're, even with things like Special Charge, you're really on the clock to win the game in just a few turns, and ultimately I don't think Toad can do that. Toad Bats also gains Acerola and Marshadow. Same reasons why they're good in the above deck as this one, and the same reasons for the weaknesses. And once again, Toad Garb. Ability Lock is actually slept on in Expanded. It's not used too much, and the reason being it's kind of slow. Everyone does the thing they want to do on the early turns. One of the actual big things was people would just get Archeops out, so you couldn't get your Ability Lock out. But now, obviously you can get Garbotoxin up, and you now have Trashalanche Garbodor, which is very, very dangerous. A lot of turbo engines out there right now, a lot of compressors, Ultra Balls, patches, versus Seekers, a lot of items being played in the expanded format, so having maybe like a 2-2 split of Garbodors, maybe a 2-1 split even, is going to be fine. If you play something like Rescue Stretcher, you could get multiple Trashalanche to end the game very quickly after really slowing the opponent down and controlling the board for a few turns, Acerolaing up your Toads and cycling these for a few turns, taking early knockouts, forcing your opponent to dig with Sycamores to get out of this awkward spot. Trashalanche, as we've seen in Standard, can just announce the attack twice to win the game. Very decent deck. I think Toad Garb is the most scary Toad variant for me. Although Giratina can shut down, other DCU decks, and Bats can be good against low HP stuff, I think Toad with both Garbodors is probably the most threatening Garbodor deck in my opinion. I think you only play like 3 or 4 Psychics and then double colorless, but just similar shell to basically Jason Klaczynski's deck all the way back at US Nationals. I think you can take a similar shell to that, update it by putting in things like Lele's, but also having like lasers, hammers, and then have Trashalanche in there. I think it could be a very dangerous deck, and one that I'll profile on the channel shortly, because I think it's very good. So, on to page 2 of this. I didn't change the title, but don't you worry. On to Night March. Gaining Marshadow, very, very good. The new threat of Oricorio, don't know how scary it is, really. It really is annoying if you are going to be using non-EXs to fight your opponent. But if you're using Marshadow anyway, it's not too big of an issue because they can't really do anything regardless. But I think a few archetypes will be splashing in Oricorio here and there. I think you're still more worried about Karen, but having Marshadow in the deck actually helps you out a lot against Karen because now you have Lele anyway, and you can use Marshadow to copy other attacks in your discard pile. For example, you could play your own Seismitoad, or you could play your own Drampa, you could play your own Tauros. All these things are options for you. And using Marshadow GX gives you an option after Karen. So Night March doesn't simply extend the hand as soon as your opponent Lele's for a Karen. So pretty good news there. Marshadow a great addition to regular Night March and also Maxi March. Gaining Machoke is going to really help you out against Trevenant and even maybe to an extent Greninja. So yeah, good card. Machoke probably jumps into the Maxi March lists. Very good card. Archistois does gain Wishy-Washy GX, which can give a big burst knockout whilst preserving energy, which is pretty cool for you, and you gain Brooklet Hill, which can help scout out early Keldeos and such, but overall I don't think Archistois ever reached many heights in Expanded. I think since Getsis pretty much started getting popular, I think the archetype got a lot worse. There's also things to worry about like Galissapod GX and Tapu Lele GX. There was a handful of decks that used to play Mewtwo, but now everyone plays Lele. And everyone playing Lele means that your 7 energy Keldeo is never really a good idea anymore. So everyone can just go Lele for Hex, attach DCE, respond on your Keldeo and Hex you. Oh god, it's just gross. I think Archistois is probably a dying archetype. Mega Ray gains Mallow, which is good in Standard and can be once again reproduced in Expanded, but also has to worry about Sudowoodo and Necrozma. Necrozma being a big card, of course, in Trev. Raikou Eels gains a bunch of different things. Because you have so many colourless attackers in the last couple of sets, things like Drampa, Necrozma, you have the potential to play lots of these different cards and have a much more sort of Eel toolboxy style deck, similar to how Bronzong plays a bunch of different attackers. I haven't deciphered which is best, but having the option to go Koko, Necrozma, Devolve could be good, as it is in Standard. Koko spreading even things on like Vespiquen against Night March, even spreading can be good for use. And you have the second attack of Tapu Koko, which is actually similar to Raikou in that it does 100 for 3 energy, and that's not even bad as a non-EX, and it has free retreat as well, so Koko could be slipping into Raikou decks. Not sure about Necrozma, depends on the metagame. Drampa could be a one-off to improve your Toad matchup, which is already decent when you have heavy Rough Seas counts. Again, Marshadow can be thrown into the deck as well to one-shot Darkrai's early on. There's a new Electros that I think it does 160 damage. I don't think you'll ever play it because we have so many better toolboxy attackers that I've listed above, but that can potentially hit 180 if you play like Muscle Bands in your deck, and that could be cool for a non-EX, so who knows. I don't think there's any big new threats for Raikou Eels. I was going to put Marshadow in there, but you're a non-EX anyway, so you don't really care about Marshadow taking one-shots. You expect things to one-shot you regardless, so I don't think there's too many threats for Raikou Eels, and with Archeops going, it actually maybe looks a bit better. I have this high in the tier list, spoiler alert. Next up, Vespiquen Flareon. I think gaining a few other evolutions could be very cool for this card. I think Umbreon GX is the biggest one we have to take note of, because you can vastly improve your Trevenant matchup now. You can be doing a lot of good damage against them, which otherwise was basically an auto loss for Vespiquen Flareon. Now you can play like 2 Umbreon GX and like 4-5 Dark and be happy in the matchup. In a similar vein, you could try out Sylveon GX. Sylveon never really made it in Standard so far, but there's not too many threats out there for Sylveon, and having the Plea GX as an option could do work against a few archetypes. Wiping off like 6 energy from a Turbo Darkrai could be incredible. Getting rid of something like a Primal Groudon could be hilarious. All these things, Plea is a good option, and having the Magical Ribbon approach means that you can search out even under item lock, so maybe Sylveon's even an option in Vespiquen Flareon. At the very least, you could play Machoke as well, also answering some more awkward matchups, really just the Trev I'm thinking about most. And Vespiquen Flareon unfortunately gets caught in the crossfire. There's a lot of love for Night March around the Facebook groups and other content sites. People are saying Night March is much better with Marshadow, which I tend to agree with. But Vespiquen Flareon gets caught in the crossfire of people sticking in the Karen, sticking in the Oricorio to not lose to these archetypes. I think Vespiquen Flareon maybe survives a little bit better, especially if it does play things like Umbreon or Sylveon, because you can still have stable damage in the deck. But it's still obviously a painful thing to keep an eye on and be worried about throughout your day if you play Vespiquen Flareon. Primal Groudon gains Wishful Baton, a very interesting tool which can keep all the energy on board if your Groudons are going down, but typically I think you'll only really play 1 Baton and still have things like Sash and Scramble Switch. I think that's just a better option. But Brooklet Hill is actually low-key like a really big addition for Groudon. I think it's a really good card. Ensuring as many Groudons as you can early on, or even finding like Regirock promo on the early turns, start stacking to Regirock promo, then you can either Scramble Switch later on, when you have a Groudon, or you can just play Ninja Boy even in the deck, Ninja Boy into a Primal Groudon, or Ninja Boy into a Groudon, then Primal on the same turn, to make sure your opponent can never access the Groudon. It's going to be really big for you. A big issue for Groudon, however, is Tapu Lele GX is around. It's something that Wobbuffet can't prevent, and it can grab early Guzmas and Lysanders, and that really does trouble your Groudons in the early game. That's why I was saying with Brooklet Hill, you're going to be grabbing Regirocks, because they're much safer. And potentially we're going to see like a Ninja Boy style variant of Groudon. I think that's something I want to play around with. Sounds pretty fun to me. So yeah, even like stacking up Regirock with a Wishful Baton, they have to knock out the Regirock and then all those energies go onto Groudon. They've taken a single prize and then Groudon's ready to go. I think it sounds really good in theory. So that's how I want to see Groudon progress in the future. And it's a new way of defending yourself against Guzma, which is going to be important. So, finally we have the third page. Volcanion does gain the new fire attackers, which is pretty cool. Turtle, very, very good for Volcanion decks. When you're blacksmithing onto him a bunch, then using his GX attack to reload can be amazing. Kiawe, I don't think you'll play it, but it could be a one-of alongside your blacksmiths. Personally, I don't think you will. Blacksmith overall is just too good. But it's an option for you. Couple new threats, I think, because water archetypes. I said Archistoys probably won't succeed, but I think there will be an Aquabox style deck because you can play, similar to Turbo Darkrai, you can play 4 Elixir for Aqua Patch, and now that you have Compressor, I think it's much better than it ever was in Standard. So I believe that archetype to be a budding new one that could enter the field of combat in Expanded. There's also the threat of Gardevoir GX, just like in Standard. Acelgor Wob, as I've said, Acerola and Guzma, big problems, big no-nos for Acelgor Wob. I believe this archetype is pretty much dead, and there's even the Comfey, if Guardy wants to attack against it, who knows. Comfey, of course, basically it's like the Virizion ability, but for Fairy Energy instead. Maybe decks that were playing Virizion, because they were playing like Rainbow Energies, now they can play a non-EX instead and be less worried about their bench. So even Comfey is a downgrade for Acelgor Wob, so I don't see that deck working anymore. Greninja gains Rescue Stretcher, a really big card for the deck, much better than just playing Super Rods. Does have to worry about Gliscopod, but I don't think it's too big of a deal. I think Greninja could still survive pretty much as it was. Carbink Zygarde does gain Brooklet Hill as well. Again, really nice stadium card, really good for the deck. Getting you set up much cleaner and much more consistently. I think you do sometimes need the support of your other stadiums, but Brooklet Hill could be in the mix there to help your early turns and help you under item lock as well. Another issue is Gliscopod once again. Just this grass weakness creeping up is going to be potentially awkward for you. And the fact that there's just more GXs out there right now means that Carbink gets knocked out much easier. Carbink was a wall for a bunch of decks, was an annoying thing to get around. But now it seems much less of an impactful ability because there are so many actual GXs in the metagame and a bunch of non-EXs as well. So Carbink's ability gets worse, but I think the deck remains maybe prevalent because of its typing. Its typing is going to be really strong for Darkrai. Sableye Garb also gains Trash Launch Garbodor. I think Sableye Garb will now play Rainbow Energies, so you can attack with both. And you also gain the Limitation Sableye, the one that stops your opponent using supporters. So you can trap Hoopers and then start going for Limitation for deck out. Could be quite fun, especially because you have so many like grunts and stuff. I don't think you'll necessarily play the Limitation Sableye, maybe a 1 copy just to like get a surprise win against your opponent. But I think the Trash Launch will be a guaranteed card in Sableye Garb because it's so good at running through resources for the opponent. It is very annoying for everyone. And now your win condition goes from stall for game, it's going to be stall till Trash Launch, then Trash Launch takes 6 prizes in 3 turns, and the opponent can't do anything to stop it. Sableye Garb, very good for that. New threats, Guzma, I should actually have put Gardevoir GX as well. Gardevoir being able to sort of out-attach the Sableye and also having the GX attack to put its 10 best cards back into the deck could be awkward for you, so Sableye Garb has to worry about Guardy as well. Mega Manectric, it does gain potentially Tapu Koko GX, pretty cool for just blowing things up with its GX attack, something Mega Man never really had available to it, could be pretty good, but Marshadow GX, it gets caught in the crossfire, people trying to counter Turbo Dark, I would expect a handful. That is a big no-no for Mega Man, and the fact that Mega Man can't really keep up with Turbo Darkrai anyway means it's probably quite bad. So I think Mega Man isn't as tanky as it used to be, and that's really how the archetype shone. It used to have like 2 or 3 max potions, and that's just not a viable option anymore. Tool Drop also could play Trash Launch Garb. I think this is the one where it fits best, in fact, because you're already playing like 7 Psychic Energy, so you can actually get Trash Launch going very, very consistently. The idea being that on the early turns, you can put a load of your items into play, start hitting big with the Trubbish, thanks to, what's it called, the Stadium Dimension Valley, and for your opponent to keep up, they have to keep maintaining attackers, keep cycling through their own deck, and that's when Trash Launch is going to be big damage. One of the big downsides of Tool Drop was you could lose the game just to a Megaphone, or due to item lock, and now that may not be the case because you have Trash Launch. I still think you're pretty bad against Trevenant. I still think you're not great against Seismitoad. You're still really bad against the item lock stuff, but Trash Launch really helps out against a bunch of other things. I've spelled Trash Launch wrong. I think there's a couple of spelling errors here. I was doing these slides till like 4 in the morning, so that's maybe why. But yeah, Trash Launch Garb, you all know what I'm on about. Choice Band as well, a small buff for the deck. More tools, more relevant tools for the deck to potentially use. Rainbow Force, I think there's a few potential candidates for things that can sit on your bench, which are slight upgrades to the deck, but I don't think anything major. And Sudowoodo is another threat for this archetype. Nothing too major again. I personally just don't rate Rainbow Road. I think it's not amazing, to be honest. Potentially the resistance to Dark could help it out a little bit, trading on some of these other EX and GX decks, but overall I'm not overly enthusiastic about Rainbow Force. I don't think it's top tier, but maybe that's just a stigma I have against it. Who knows? It could show up. So let's have a look at decks. Now that we've gone over the old stuff, how that improves or gets worse, we can have a look at brand new archetypes, and these are some exciting ones for me. So on the left, I've mentioned it a bit, Patch City or like Aqua Box style, where you're going to play heavy Rough Seas count to pretty much have a really good matchup against Trev and Seismitoad. You also have Collect on Lapras, so you can keep drawing under item lock to draw into your Rough Seas against things like Trevenant exactly. So that could be very good for you. You're going to play like 1 Keldeo to get out of status conditions. You're going to play Articunos, which is a big deal, really helps out against non-EX decks, so you can fight Night March. You can do 2 for 2s if they're playing Marshadow, or you can do a 2 for 1 if they use their non-EXs, and Articuno can respond on them very, very effectively. Similar case for early turns against other Gardevoir players, Vespiquen Flareon, a lot of things. You can take early prizes with Articuno. And you also have the Lapras that does 160, which obviously with a tool attached, you can be doing 180, and that's going to one-shot EX and GX basics. So very, very good, dangerous archetype in my opinion. I think this is... Everyone's talking about Turbo Darkrai as like one of the best decks in format, but I think that Aquabox could be up there, to be honest. Grass Weakness is annoying, Vespiquen's around, maybe Gliscopod, but I think there's a lot more people who are going to be playing Marshadow than Grass stuff, and Aquabox is really similar in its engine to Turbo Darkrai. The list itself is very, very similar, where you'll play Compressors, Patches, Elixirs, and your attackers are similar. You're getting one-shots with the Lapras, you have Articuno, which can really improve your prize racing against non-EX decks. And the much bigger thing is that Rough Seas is so much better at dealing with item lock than Darkrai is. Darkrai can actually lose to item lock decks. It can lose to Trevenant even. If Trev plays things like Headringers and Hammers, you can actually lose if you're the Darkrai player, especially because you're super item reliant, like really heavily item reliant. If they go first against you, it's really bad. Aquabox is much better against both item lock decks because you have Collect, and Rough Seas just negates damage so much better, and Keldeo Rough Seas just negates pretty much all of Toad's damage as well, so really, really strong for you. I think you're much better against the item lock decks than Turbo Dark ever is, the downside being your damage is capped a lot lower than Darkrai's a lot of the time. So I think overall, definitely a powerful archetype, one that will surely be strong. Gardevoir Gallade, I think... because of Gallade, really, I think this archetype has a shot in the meta. Really good against Turbo Darkrai, just a very efficient non-EX, which can help out against other non-EX decks. I think you're probably going to play 2 Gallade in the list, or at least 1 and a Rescue Stretcher. You still have the potential to go the Gardevoir route. I think you'll play a 3-2 line. That's kind of what I'm theorizing with Guardy Gallade in Expanded. With such inherent high HP and good output with Infinite Force, the archetype is still very strong. Twilight GX still good against Gardevoir variants, which may make a splash in Expanded as well. Just because there's so much item usage around every other deck, Gardevoir having a good Garb matchup is going to be insane for you as well. So we just know how good Guardy is. I think it's probably fine, really, in Expanded. I think if you tech for your bad matchups, Karen in there for Night March, Giratina promo in there for Trev, Sudowoodo maybe for Ray even. I probably wouldn't play Sudowoodo, but maybe the first 2 is enough for you to compete against a bunch of different decks. And having Resistance to Dark plus the Gallade in there, I think you have a bunch of good matchups. So Gardevoir Gallade, it's amazing in Standard. I think it's good in Expanded as well. I don't think it's top tier, but it could be. It could make its way into this meta and really make a big splash. One archetype that I'm actually really excited about and want to start testing heavily is going to be Ninetales Salazzle. I don't think I've heard anyone talk about this archetype. Maybe it's just me being a madman, but I think this has potential. Water weakness is probably the biggest thing holding it back. You have a terrible Toad matchup, but you could potentially play Dramper and try your best against it. The idea being, you can take 1-hit KOs for 1 energy with Hexed Flame, thanks to the burn buff that we got, and the new Hot Poison Salazzle. You can deal 180 with a Choice Band or a Silver Bangle. You'll just use Choice Band, obviously, with Hex Flame for 1 energy. That's bonkers. That's super, super, super good. So it's really an upgrade to Ninetales Amoonguss, which was, experimented with and expanded at the very least for a while. Now we do better damage because Salazzle deals an automatic 30 with Hot Poison. So Hex Flame does 120 once you've used the Salazzle. Then you have Choice Band for 150, and the Hot Poison itself doing Burn plus Poison is 180. So that's amazing. And the best thing is Ninetales has Bright Look. Bright Look is crazy good. It basically wins you Trevenant because you can make sure that you're not really under item lock very often, and you can keep gusting up their Lele's or their Necrozma, or even if they've had to use Shaymin EXs, sometimes they still play those. It's going to be much, much better for you just to free yourself of the lock. And in every other matchup, Bright Look is still crazy good, because again, you're making sure you take 2 prize knockouts every time. It's a really neat combination. We saw Salazzle do well at Worlds, surprisingly, and I think this could be another surprise to Expanded, because playing like 4-4 Ninetales and a 4-3-1 GX Salazzle means that you could use Diabolical Claws to end up with your last 2 prizes in the game. So a very aggressive fire deck, potentially as aggressive as Volcanion, actually, which is pretty nuts. So this is one that no one's talked about, but I'm enthusiastic to tell you guys about it, because I think it has a chance. It's going to be something that I have to build and make for the channel, because it sounds spicy and cool and fun to play. So if you have no better ideas, Ninetales Salazzle could be a really cool one for you guys to try and Expanded. Couple more out here, well actually 3 more. We have Bronzong. Bronzong's been around. Denying DCE decks is better than ever, I think, with Night March being on the radar, Vespiquen Flareon being on the radar, and Seismitoad still being in and around. You can play the Metal Fortress Bronzong that you can see there to tech against Trev, and you have good typing for Guardy if that pops up as well. So I think Aegislash is at his strongest he's ever been, really. You do, of course, have to worry about Hex Maniac. That's always going to shut you down. But if it's like Toad playing Hex, they're probably not going to win. If it's Night March playing Hex, yeah, that can be a little bit worse for you. But you can play the Break, or you can play Oricorio on your own side. There are ways I can see you beating Night March as the Metal deck. I think the biggest issues for the Metal deck will be things like Turbo Darkrai and other Fire decks like Volcanion. So it has a bunch of good matchups, but a handful of awkward ones. I think it's good against the top tier, but not great against some of the mid-tier stuff. So could be an interesting meta call if you want to rock with metal stuff. Persimmon is also one right now that has amazing typing. Mew being able to one-shot Marshadows and Persimmon one-shotting Darkrai's. I mean, in a really closed vacuum, that could be really good for you. Again, you can play techs to try and improve other awkward matchups, like your item lock matchups, you can improve with things like Tauros and a Dramper. You can improve your Trev by playing maybe even your own Maxis build and play Machoke. Again, you can play Maxis with Marowak as well to improve your Toad. Maybe we're going to see a Maxi Persimmon deck. That would be really cool to see. But the shell of the deck is a very easy to make, easy to build, consistent, fast, non-EX deck that has great typing right now. Ticks a lot of boxes for me, and I've been waiting to see Persimmon do well for so damn long. Can someone do it now? Can someone be good with Persimmon, please? It's gonna be good, right? It's good in the meta, I think. So yeah, I want to see someone rock Persimmon and Expanded. The final deck I'll talk about is the World's Finalist deck in Standard, and we're going to try and transfer that over to Expanded as well. It doesn't really gain many new tricks in Expanded, but the baseline and the core of the deck is still strong, right? You have good typing against Toad, Aquabox, and Greninja. You have Ability Lock to fall back on. You have Trash Launch, which I must say is very strong and Expanded. Everyone wants to get Mega Turbo turn 1s with just a bunch of compressors, bunch of Ultra Balls, bunch of patches. And the thing is, decks can't operate by going slowly in Expanded. A lot of them need to go for these compressor-style things, or else they'll just lose. So Trash Launch is just crazy good in Expanded. So having Ability Lock as well, and still the sort of gusting approach with Acerola, Gliscod Garb could still be a contender in the format for sure. Only really has to worry about things like Volk, and that's not too good right now. Probably doesn't have a great Trev either, but you have so many Acerola that you can maybe just keep bouncing and first impressioning is probably fine. So yeah, I think even this archetype has a shot in the new expanded format. So here we go. Let's do a rundown of what I expect to be good in expanded. Trev, you can see there's a few things that I crossed out. There's a few things I put a star to. The things with stars I believe are greatly improving or adapting their lists at least. So you can see I put a star against things like Maxi March, Trev, Tool Drop, Turbo Darkrai, Toad Garb with the new Garb, Raikou Eagles with a few new cool attackers, and Sableye Garb also gaining Trash Launch. So these decks are greatly improving or changing. The other decks remain popular. There's obviously the crossed out Vileplume builds, they're banned. I've crossed out the Maxi's part of the Yveltal deck, because I believe it will be more like Yveltal Dramper, maybe like a speed build, or maybe it could even be oppressive with things like Silent Labs, who knows. Archiestoise, I believe, will just be replaced by sort of an Aquabox style deck. Rainbow Road I crossed out just because I don't like it. A Selgor Warb dies due to Guzma. Mega Man pretty much is gone because of Marshadow being thrown into a bunch of decks, as well as things like Groudon, as well as things like Gallade in Gardevoir. All these things spell trouble for Mega Man. And then we have the 6 new archetypes that I just discussed, leaving 24 viable archetypes in the meta. That's still a bunch. There's probably more out there as well. I've pretty much scratched the surface with my testing with Expanded. I believe I'm pretty close to the mark, but there could still be more archetypes out there. I'm really happy that I spotted Salazzle Ninetales as an archetype, because I think that's what I really want to try, and I hope it's good. I also hope Persimmon's good, like really badly. I'll feel kind of silly if neither of them see any showings anywhere. I doubt many of them will be played for Fort Wayne, because, you know, it's kind of risky and it's maybe a bit too late for people to test them, but as the format matures, maybe one of those decks makes headway, and I'd be super pleased if that was the case. So yeah, plenty of archetypes still to choose from. Hopefully the deck that you're testing for Fort Wayne is still on this slide and it hasn't been crossed out, and hopefully I haven't scared you guys off playing a certain archetype. So a couple more slides to go. We are going to look at the top techs that are going to probably be played in decks. One of the biggest things about Expanded is there's so much around right now. As I just said, 24 viable archetypes. What do you tech against? What's the things that you have to worry about the most? For me, I think these will be the most common techs that you'll see in lists. Giratina promo, with that Devour Light, stopping Break Evolution's abilities. It basically means that Trevenant cannot use its Break Evolution, so it can't Silent Fear and spread damage. One of the biggest win conditions for it is going to be to Silent Fear a bunch, then Necrozma for game. They can still win the game just by using Tree Slam on the non-break evolution, but it does have a lot less HP, and it's a lot slower because it's always 2 manual attachments and not 1. So it really does help defend against that. Giratina also has the additional benefit of improving Greninja, because they're not able to use their Giant Water Shurikens, which is the whole point of Greninja. So this tackles potentially 2 large archetypes, and is likely going to be seen as a one-of in a bunch of decks. Oricorio and Karen, both in here to try and stop the sort of Battle Compressor style decks, mainly Vespiquen and Night March. Supernatural Dance being able to cash in with a bunch of damage if the opponent goes crazy with Pokemon in the bin, or Karen to reset them, and maybe they've used too many resources to put more Pokemon back into the bin and really limit their output for the future turns. I think if you're a higher HP deck, like a Gardevoir, you will play Karen. I think if you're a non-EX deck that just wants to trade effectively, maybe you put the Oricorio in. Take your pick, experiment, and see which works out best for you. Marshadow GX, I've said a bit, because Turbo Darkrai is expected to be top tier and is going to be good, it's going to be a threat. A few people will be playing Marshadow just to gain that fighting typing. A few other decks may play Marshadow just to have different typing themselves, like Seismitoad could struggle against all grass decks. Now you can play 1 or 2 Marshadow and change your typing if need be. So yeah, Marshadow will be seen in a bunch of decks, I believe, as well, not only to tech against Dark, but just in general being a nice option for a few different reasons. Drampa GX, I think a lot of people are sleeping on in Expanded. Still a very strong card. Righteous Edge is incredibly good in Expanded. One of the main reasons people like to play the Metal Box, the Aegislash Bronzong sort of thing, was because you can play Cobalion EX and get rid of DCEs. Well, you can do the same here with Drampa, and Righteous Edge is universal because it's a colourless energy. Really, really good. Berserk still powerful, of course. Big Wheel is going to be a nice consistency card. There's no reason to not stick a single Drampa in your deck, I don't think, unless it's something really specific. So Drampa is going to be a cool option for sure. Getsis, Getsis, no one wants to see him, but turn 1 he can be a game winner. If all you have is things like Ultra Ball as outs for you to draw cards. Lots of patch, compressor, Ultra Ball decks out there. They are all going to struggle against an early Getsis sometimes, and you can pretty much end the game with like a 5-card swing on turn 1 by getting rid of 5 from your opponent and drawing 5 for yourself. Could be pretty bonkers, so be aware of how many items you are using in your deck, and remember that people will be going for turn 1 Getsis against you, especially because Lele is a thing, and Lele is much better to be on your bench than a Jirachi EX ever was. So there's less downside to using a Getsis now, and that's pretty scary to think about. So bear in mind, Getsis is going to be around. And the final one's Silent Lab. Silent Lab is going to be used in Greninja, of course, to shut down Giratina promo. So don't think one Giratina promo wins you Greninja. You need to also have Stadiums or Field Blowers or a combination of the two, because they will definitely play Silent Labs. Silent Lab also going to be good against Marshadow GX and other, the Night March deck and other people playing Marshadow. That's important. Shutting down Lele and Shaman in general is also going to be very good. This is why I said Yveltal Drampa will probably play Silent Labs. I remember a way back we saw a successful Yveltal list. I'm really scratching my head who it was. I believe it was Sosa, who was one of the first players to not play Laserbank in his Yveltal list, and instead he moved over to Silent Lab, and Silent Lab shuts down a bunch of different things, and if the opponent can't bounce it, it could be crazy good for you. So we might be seeing some quad Silent Lab builds out there right now to slow down other decks. It stops like Darkrai, GX, even bouncing to the bench. It stops a bunch of things. So yeah, be aware of Silent Lab. It could be around, and make sure you're playing a relatively high count of your own stadium if it's important enough, or a couple of Field Blower. And finally on the right you can see all the options for your Maxi deck if you are going to play Maxi March, or if you're going to stick with Yveltal Maxis. These are the ones to consider for sure. Machoke to improve against Trev, as well as Greninja. Marowak to help out against Seismitoad EX and Giratina EX. And also Gallade to give you a nice bit of deck control in combination with things like Oranguru. That could be really cool for you to draw into specific cards to get you game. As well as being a fighting type that can one-shot Darkrai's, so he too is going to be a valuable asset to your deck, because Darkrai may indeed be one or two of your rounds in future tournaments. So, let's wrap it up with my tier list. This is, like I said, experimental, theory crafted. I've not sat down and done 10 games with every single deck against every other single matchup. This is pretty much the opinions of the public and other article producers and other content creators, as well as my own. So if there's something that you think is top tier that's not tier 1 on my list, or you think there's something that is that doesn't deserve to be there, feel free to argue with me down below. But this is just what I've gone for. In tier 1, these are the decks that I think will either be the best or the most popular. This is a very important note. I believe Turbo Darkrai and Night March and Trev will be the 3 most popular archetypes that you'll see at the early regionals, because there's a huge amount of hype around all these decks. Even if they're not actually tier 1, they're tier 1 threats, because you will have to tech against them, you will have to be able to beat those decks, because they will be popular. I also think that Aquabox, unsung hero of Expanded, I think it's almost as good as Turbo Darkrai, and in some matchups it's even better, so be aware of Aquabox, start testing it, it is a very strong deck. As is Raikou Eels, again, kind of an unsung hero. Everyone feels like the deck is kind of fair, but now that Archeops is gone, it's much more unfair of a deck, because there's no check really to these Eels. You're a big non-EX deck. You have Jolteon EX in there as well to beat other basic decks like Volk and Turbo Darkrai, and that's going to be really difficult for a lot of things to work around. So Raikou Eels also a top tier deck in my opinion. Dropping down to tier 2, Volk and Ninja, solid. We know what they're all about, really. Greninja gets caught in the crossfire that a few people will be teching. Giratina promo, it just means that you have to play High Silent Lab. There's no way around that. Volcanion, it's pretty good. It's a big one-hit KO deck. You can actually play Rough Seas as well in this archetype to improve your Trevenant matchup, which I don't think enough people will be doing, but I think that can improve your Trev if you play a high enough count. Toad variants, I believe, only down in tier 2, as long as people are playing Drampers, as long as people are still conscious of Toad. I don't think it will be top tier, but I think of the 3, I would love to see Seismitoad Garb do well, or come out, because I believe that is the most powerful archetype. Ability Lock is strong still, and so too is Trashalanche, because it is just a really powerful attack. If you look at all the top tier stuff, they're using a bunch of items, maybe the exclusion of like Raikou Eels, and Trashalanche is going to be really good against all those things, so pretty good to note. Vespiquen Flareon also gets caught in the crossfire of Night March being hyped, so people will be playing Karens, they will be playing Oricorios. That's why I've only had it in at tier 2. Its typing is still really strong, Grass against Seismitoad and like Groudon and such. Fire typing is going to be not super relevant, but it can be good against things like Bronzong, Golisopod, I guess. And you now can play Umbreon GX, which I believe is probably what you should be doing to give you a pretty good Trev, and it also gives you a sniper against, again, like things like Groudon. People probably won't expect that, and you can pop Sashes with that, you can knock out Joltix with it even, so yeah, I think Umbreon GX, good card for sure. Primal Groudon in at tier 2, I think it does have to adapt to everyone else playing Lele. One of the big things about Groudon was that Wobbuffet stopped Shaman, which stopped drawing cards a lot of the time. Now Lele can still get them going in the deck, they can still operate quite conventionally, and that's going to be awkward for Groudon. At the same time, people can Lele for Guzma and start hitting your Groudons really early. I think it has to adapt, as I mentioned earlier, Brooklet Hill, finding Regirock, starting attaching to those, wishful batoning, all these fun things with Ninja Boy. It could be the way to play Groudon, and I want to see someone get creative there. Salazzle Ninetales, oh my god, someone play this deck, it's so cool. You have Gusting to make sure you're taking 2 prizes as often as possible. You have also the Gusting to improve your Trev. Oh, it's such a cool combo. It's really neat. It's a 1 energy, 1 hit knockout, stage 1 deck. What's not to like about it? Someone please play this deck. Please, please, please. Similar for Persimmon. Typing is going to be good for some of the top tier stuff. The Raikous, the Darkrai's, the Marshadows all will struggle against just because of your typing alone. And you're consistent, you're non-EX. That's pretty much good against a bunch of things. It does have to worry about Toad for sure, and it does have to worry about Trev, even if you're teching for it. Like, even if you play Giratina promo, probably not enough to win you the game. So you maybe have to play Maxi's engine in Passimian. That's probably how I would try and do it, although Compressor isn't amazing in Passimian. You may have to go down that route. Guardy Gallade, I've only put it tier 2, and I was honestly close to putting this tier 1. I think it does have to play almost too many techs to be super consistent. We saw at Worlds, the list at 1 was just really straightforward. And the fact that you have to play all sorts of things, Diancie and Giratina, all to beat item lock stuff, you've got to play. Oh, by the way, Diancie heals against Trev, which is also really, really important to note, I should say. But they can still just use Tree Slam a couple of times, but still important. Then you have things like Oricorio or Karen. I think you should play Karen. But having Gallade, going to be really good against Darkrai. Having Gardevoir in general just being a nutty good attacker. I think the archetype could be good. Very, very close to putting this tier 1. I think it will be a threat in Expanded. Be aware some people will be playing Guardy Gallade if they figure it out and get it consistent. In at tier 3, Sableye Garb. I think some people are just against the deck in general, so I don't think it'll be too popular. I think it's kind of risky to play the archetype in general, but who knows, people could go for it. Similar thing for Zygarde Carbink. I think Carbink reducing in value was a big issue, but the typing is still there. Tool Drop's a cool one, but bad against item locking things. Golisopod Garb, pretty cool against Toad if you expect a lot of that, but a few decks can actually hit 210 quite easily in Expanded. Turbo Darkrai being one of them, and pretty much from there it's down to your Trash Launch to see if that can one-hit KO them back. Bronzong, pretty good against DCE stuff, and you can tech it out even further for different matchups. Dark Dragons, I think just play Turbo Darkrai. I don't think the Dragons do enough right now. Yveltal, you can see I've changed it to Yveltal Drampa. I think it kind of does have a place. I think Drampa could be good enough. Maybe even Drampa Garb is still good enough in Expanded. I haven't really figured that out yet. But you pretty much just play a standard list of Drampa Garb and see how it does in Expanded. I think maybe you have to play Elixirs in Drampa Garb to keep up with all these things that can just one-bang your Drampas back and forth. But as I've said so many times, heavy item usage going on. It could even just be a Yveltal Garb deck, like we saw in London Internats, and you just play a few Rainbows and play Trash Launch in there. Who knows? Yveltal has a spot in this tier list. I've put it at tier 3 because I haven't figured out, or haven't put enough time into Yveltal. But the shell of Yveltal is still very strong. You have Dark Typing for Trev. You have a whole bunch of different attackers available. You can play Garb if you want to. So many reasons why Yveltal is probably still up there. So bear in mind, this could still be a top archetype. And Mega Ray, I think it's not great at tackling the item lock stuff. I think it's also pretty bad against like Night March. It's even much worse than against Turbo Darkrai than it used to be, because Darkrai GX takes a big knockout, and maybe can do that on a Hex turn, or a turn that they like Blower, or they can even play Sudowoodo if they want to. So I personally just have Ray in at tier 3, because too many things can one-bang it. Even like Joltix are going to be around, Raikou is going to be around. There's a whole bunch of things that can just deal with Ray too easily, in my opinion. So, wow, lots of talking, lots to discuss. I feel like I've only scratched the surface. There's going to be tons of decks coming soon with Expanded, because after making this video, I am so enthusiastic to start testing Expanded. It's a whole new game, and it's a really, really cool game because everyone sets up and does what they want to do. So Expanded's a format I'm very much looking forward to playing. Please get involved in the discussion down below. I'm sure there's things that I missed. I'm sure I made some spelling errors in there and made other mistakes maybe along the way. What do you enjoy playing? Let me know what you think is going to win Fort Wayne as well. I want to know all these things down below, but most importantly, thanks for watching, guys. Please leave a like to the video if you did. Took a lot of time to get this ready, and I'm running out of breath talking, but yeah, hopefully the excitement is shining through here. So yeah, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. For now,